Morning, everybody. I'd like to call the Metropolitan Governance Task Force for this Wednesday, November 8th to order. And after we approve the meeting, we'll have a quick update on the public engagement. Most of that is now set. And then we'll have a pretty extended conversation about the vision and goal setting for the task force. And then we added a piece around staggered terms, which I'll explain once we get to that part of the agenda. But our first item of business is approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion? Thank you very much, Chair Cleavorn. Is there discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the motion prevails. And I just wanted to note on the record that we have several members who are joining us online. Commissioner Green, Senator Port, Mr. Reed, and Ms. Pereira Webb are all joining us online. So we have our public engagement meetings set. There's a possibility that the one on the 7th will be changed, but we're working on that. The Thursday, the 14th is set, and that will be at the Lake Elmo City Center. Thank you, Representative Weens and Commissioner Bingham for your input on that. And then on Friday, the 5th, we'll be at the Urban Research and Outreach Engagement Center in Minneapolis. And then we go to Scott County on Tuesday, the 9th. And thank you, Senator Pratt, for your helping with the logistics of that. So we were, Ms. Beckman, appreciate her involvement in this, and we're working with Ms. Kohler on kind of agendas for these meetings. And so if anyone has thoughts about this, please get in touch with us. But we want to certainly involve the task force members who have in whose jurisdiction or vicinity these meetings are taking place, in kind of welcoming people, and then we'll have maybe a prearranged panel of local folks to kick things off, and then of course we'll open that up to the public. So, but these agendas are being developed, and would like, again, any suggestions or advice from task force members about who should be invited. If we want to make some special outreach to certain constituencies in these jurisdictions, we will do that. So any questions on public engagement? This is a very important part of our work, and I'm glad to see this coming together and that we have some ample time to use this month to really ensure a good turnout and at least the right people showing up at these meetings. So I'd like to now move to a very important part of our agenda. I think when we introduced this, hello, Mayor. Yeah. That's okay. I introduced this a couple of weeks ago. We had a preliminary discussion, maybe 15, 20 minutes. And at that time, I think I said that because Senator Pratt and I are such football fans, I said we're at halftime, so this is a good time to do this. Now we probably have kicked off here the third quarter. So we still have quite a bit of work to do, but I think if you recall the president of the, Lynn Peterson, the president of the Metropolitan Agency in Portland, who was here last week, talked a lot about values. And I did not set her up for this, but I think really brought home the point that we have to have some sense of exactly what we want the structure to look like from the perspective of those who are engaged with it, the citizens, the county commissioners, the city councilors, business interests, labor interests. And we can't really get into the structure and the nitty-gritty of that, I think, without this kind of conversation about values and what it is that we want a potentially new structure of our regional planning agency to look like. So I thought the President Peterson really did a great job of framing that from her perspective, and you know, Ms. Paddock has also been very helpful in terms of bringing this discussion to this task force. And I wanted to call on Ms. Paddock to kick us off here, because she found in the legislative auditor document from 2011 a discussion of values and principles, and I thought that would be a good way to start us off today, because we may not need to reinvent the wheel, or we might need to add a few spokes to the wheel. But I thought when Ms. Paddock showed this to me, I thought that a lot of these ideas are ones that I think resonate still 11 years after, or 12 years after this report. So Ms. Paddock, I think I'd just call on you to maybe just recite these, and maybe that could kick off our discussion. Chair Cleavorn.
Thank you. And Ms. Paddock, I don't know what you're about to present, but could you give us, just so we have the citation, the page number and the actual report document? That would be helpful for us to be able to go back and look at that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And yeah, because members should have received this. It's from I think that the actual document is the legislative auditor's report, but it was contained in the Blue Ribbon Commission packet that everybody received. But that's a good point, and we'll certainly circulate that. But we'll just ask Ms. Paddock to read from that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It is indeed in the document that we all received, and it is on page 213. It is part of the legislative auditor's report, which was reprinted in this document. So I finally started to do the homework that you gave us very early on, and to actually read this tome.
Welcome, Professor Oakfield.
And lo and behold, it starts with the concept, I guess, that if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there, and that's certainly true of us as we discuss this. So where are we going? And we started to discuss some of those values. I found these values, and I thought, well, they're the same things that we talked about last time, at least many of them are, and there are 9 of them, so I will read them. Accountability came first. Consensus building and participation. Credibility was another thing that we discussed. Effectiveness, which I think is kind of the same as competence in getting the work done right. Equity, flexibility, stability, strategic vision, and transparency. And then on the following page, they have a chart. They can kind of explicate those terms. But I thought, as you said, Chair Hornstein, maybe we could just adopt a group of these criteria and maybe decide what we mean by them and use them to measure the proposals as we examine them one by one.
Thank you, Ms. Paddock. And again, we're using this just as a guidance, and maybe there's a few of these that people feel may not be appropriate, or there's some that are left out, or there's a few of these that maybe rise to the top for you. I think, again, these are ideas that we discussed a couple weeks ago by way of just introduction. Some of them, there's others that we didn't. But I think they are really good framing concepts. So, with that, members, this is, and I talked again with Representative Kosnick about this. I mean, we haven't had this opportunity as a task force to have this kind of an open discussion, and that's really what the bulk of today is about. Ms. Paddock.
Just let me qualify it a little bit. It's in the chapter of transit governance, challenges and options. So there are some that may relate more specifically to the transit part rather than the governance, overall governance.
Yeah, and of course, again, we've had a lot coming at us as a task force, what the Met Council's roles and responsibilities are, transit, we talked about wastewater and parks and other regional systems, housing, community development. But transit is a key piece, and I think it's, for many of us, why we're here, although again, as we'll find out in Lake Elmo, there's other items as well. So, members, I'm interested then, again, your reactions to this, your thoughts about it. How does it strike you? Are there items that could be deleted or added? I think that would be helpful to hear. So, yes, Representative Weens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Paddock. I think this is a good starting point. From our previous session, probably about 2 weeks ago,
Yes.
we had many of these listed. Since I was in the virtual realm, I didn't hear who actually said we need to physically define what that means when we say effectiveness versus equity versus that. So I think as we adopt these, we need to come up with a framework that we agree with. And then just in my experience, as we talk these values, I also use the term criteria. And criteria can be two different things. One can be a screening criteria. We would say that all the models or all the courses of action that we develop to solve for our problem, they have to meet this as a threshold. This is the bar. Then the other part of criteria would be evaluative criteria. As we take a look and we examine them side by side. So effectiveness, I would think, would be an evaluative criteria, whereas maybe transparency is a screening criteria. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's very helpful. Yes, Mr. Rockwell.
I would maybe add one, I'm not sure what the right word is, but it might be nimble or responsiveness. And, you know, when I think about, I guess in particular, the transit system, but also kind of all of the jurisdictional areas of the Met Council, I think one of the things where we really have fallen short is our ability to pivot with a sense of urgency. And, you know, when we had shutdowns with COVID, we saw transit agencies around the country, several, able to pivot with federal funds and quickly kind of reinvent how they operate. And we, in my opinion, dropped the ball. And that was a huge missed opportunity because we just didn't have the kind of the culture within the council of pivoting quickly. You can also imagine this as a necessary skill in a situation like the Flint water crisis, right? We're in charge of water here with the Metropolitan Council, the ability to move quickly to resolve an issue and not get bogged down kind of in a million processes, in a million analyses. And I think that we have major urgent kind of societal-wide challenges in front of us, and the Metropolitan Council is really at a focal point of how we can solve some of those challenges, whether it's affordable housing or climate change, inequities, and so being able to be more nimble feels like something that we very much don't have right now. Many of these other ones, I think the Met Council does have a number of these other categories, but not all. But I think that that nimbleness, that ability to respond quickly is just critical for an agency with this kind of jurisdiction.
Thank you, Mr. Rockwell. Your comment reminds me, and this actually stems from some of my conversations with colleagues in Scott County, and I would probably add Carver to that, some of our growing areas, and then, of course, issues that the core cities face in the future. When you talk about nimbleness, one question I would put on the table is, looking towards the future. I mean, what I've heard, again, from Senator Pratt when we had a conversation very early on in August or September, that a structure needs to be nimble, but also respond to what's coming at us in the next 25 years, for example, because the region will look quite different then. And so, we're really looking at a structure that's probably 30 or plus years old and, perhaps not as nimble, perhaps not as forward-looking or future-looking. So that's just something I wanted to put in the table as a comment to your comment. Yeah, Chair Cleveland.
Thank you. And, to the point of nimbleness, I mean, we all want responsiveness, and we all want the ability to shift if we see facts have changed, right? I mean, we all want that ability, I think. I can't speak for everybody in the room, but it would be my general thought that people would appreciate that nimbleness and flexibility. However, flexibility doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? I mean, we were discussing local control the other day. How much local control? When you're talking about a regional agency, right? How do we weigh the opinion of one member of the region over another member of the region, right? So the governmental processes, especially as we think about the legislature, are intentionally slow so that we don't have knee-jerk reaction based on one population over another population, and we look more strategically at the situation. So when we think about nimbleness, how do we take that into account? Just throwing that out there.
Helpful, very helpful. Other thoughts, ideas? Representative Kozlik, I saw you were positioning yourself for a comment, so.
Try to streamline my comments a little bit.
yeah.
As I was thinking about this, one of the values that I think might be helpful too, as we aim for transparency and accountability, is data-informed decisions, especially in the transit realm, but obviously in other areas too. And I'll forward to you, somebody shared with me a kind of a study on, recent transit changes, and we're all aware of the different commuter trends and such, especially after COVID, and I think that's going to continue to evolve, and not necessarily back to where we were in terms of everybody coming into the core cities. And so our systems need to reflect that to be accountable to the taxpayers. So commuter patterns have changed. They talked about use of intelligent transportation systems. I don't know exactly how that's defined. That sounds pretty smart. But I think the point being is data-informed decisions on what routes are actually in demand, what routes are needed. And also it talked about the different types of riders, and we've talked about that in committee quite a bit. Transit-dependent riders that I think Mr. Rockwell is very adept at advocating for, but then also the choice riders. If you're just going to a Vikings game and want to save the $30 parking or $40 or more even, that's a different type of rider, and how do we have our transit need, how are their transit needs met, and how do you price that out? And so I'll share with the committee a couple of these articles that had immediate things to do, and then kind of a 5-year outlook that I think were helpful. And trying to see if there's.
And Representative Kozlik,
Yeah.
so, maybe as you're kind of framing this up, if you could let us know the publication and.
Yeah, this is
the
from the
title.
Reason Foundation, and I'll forward it to
Okay.
Ms. Kohler, and then maybe she can send it out
Yeah.
to provide copies or something. I haven't fully read it
Yeah.
myself, but basically it talks
Yeah.
about the different changes of the patterns. But as we adjust to that, using data to provide that accountability to the taxpayers would be important.
Great. I think, is it the Reason Foundation that is very interested? Maybe I'm looking at my colleague Representative Elkins that has been a big advocate for a mileage-based user fee. That's the one? Okay.
I'm close personal friends with several of the staff members.
Okay. I just wanted to, I'm not advocating for that policy. I just thought it was, just wanted to.
I have a libertarian scoop.
Okay, well, we'll hear from you in a little bit, I think. Mayor Hovland.
Mr. Chair, I think some of you were at the Center for Transportation Studies Future Mobility event last Friday, I think it was. I was on a panel. They're doing a series on the future of mobility. And I was on a panel talking about the effectiveness of partnerships. And I think that's something we want to make sure that we don't overlook as a sort of a fundamental operative sort of concept that we have in Minnesota, and that is this power of collaboration that I don't know if the concept was born here, but we have embraced it quite well. And so I would add to this list of values, that the council should be collaborative with its partners, its constituents. And you think about who its constituents are. Its primary constituents are cities and counties. And then, of course, it's a bit removed from people, but at the end of the day, it's public at large that needs to be comfortable with the decisions that are made that affect all those different levels of government. So collaboration, I think we should add to the list.
Okay.
Collaborative, I guess, would be the operative word.
Yes, and I think, thank you, Mayor, and I know that sometimes it comes up that, we heard again from Portland, and I think you would probably hear from any regional entity that there's always a push and pull, there's tensions between local governments and regional governments. And so those are natural and to be expected, but perhaps how they're managed is, very, very important.
Mr. Chair, I agree that you're going to have those periodic moments of tension or differences of opinion. We all see that in all the work that we all do.
Yeah.
But it's inevitable. I mean, we've got one of those situations in Edina with the Met Council right now. That we got a difference of opinion on something. But nonetheless, we
I'm
get them
intrigued by that.
resolved.
I'll
We'll get
follow
these
up
things
with you
resolved.
after the meeting. Okay, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Professor Orfield.
I think that a value we should consider is the long traditions of local government law that the council should abide by and be consistent with. Maybe I'd add conservative traditions of local government law.
I'm sorry? Okay, well, Professor Orfield, finish your thought, and then I'll call on you, Commissioner Bingham.
Yeah, I mean, just, the council appears to be a local government, and just in terms of their answers, and it seems to me that whatever we are creating should be consistent with the traditions, the conservative traditions of local government law.
Good. Commissioner Bingham, thank you, Professor Orfield.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was just, in the spirit of the one-word thing, I was thinking precedent.
Okay. All right, good. A little-known fact, Commissioner Bingham were you a licensed attorney? I know you went to law school.
Mr. Chair, neither. I found it easier to marry a lawyer.
Oh, okay. I knew that there was some kind of connection there. Thank you. But precedent, very important concept. I know nothing about the law except for that. Ms. Beckman.
I think I have a little bit different take on it than Professor Orfield. For me, the takeaway from, and I really appreciate you bringing in the leader from Portland. I thought she was amazing. I'm a huge governance geek, and I had stars in my eyes as I watched her talk about all the levels of government she's worked in. But what struck me about the Met Council there, which I hadn't really put my head around until listening to her, is how much it is a creature of its environment. It is there's no sales tax in Oregon, and that results in the major metropolitan area needing to set up a taxing authority with elected officials in order to generate revenue to do what the metro needs. The geography of the state landlocks the city, but more importantly, the state legislature landlocks the city by putting that growth boundary on it. So the city is constrained, and that growth boundary has to be just massive politics, right? To say Farmington can't grow, but Minneapolis can. I mean, it is, so you have to have elected officials to make those hard decisions. And then just their ethos of local government and how that is sort of priority above all. And so they've set it up so their Met Council can preempt all the layers of county and city and township below it within that growth boundary. So on those hard land use decisions, so again, it feels like they need electeds to tax and to make those hard political land use decisions, and they value local government in a way. And it struck me that it came about as a response to all of those dynamics. And I'm curious, I'll look at Denver when they come also. They also have a really restrictive revenue system in the state of Colorado. And I think they similarly had to set up a taxing authority in order to be able to raise revenue for their transit. And so I left that thinking, we need our Met Council to be a creature of our environment. It's nice to hear what other states are doing, and I'll be interested to hear from Boston, but nobody else has our sales tax. Nobody else has our new taxing ability we just raised all the revenue, thanks to your leadership, and our connection to local government while it's good to hear from other states, we have to be realistic about the environment we're in and design a governance structure that is responsive to that. And it is a creature of the legislature, and that is the legislature's responsibility. And that just feels like a better relationship between the legislature and our Met Council than there is in Oregon. And so while precedent and, based in historical, I have sort of a counter of we're in a new reality. We have a new revenue stream. We have, the leadership of the state and the region, the health of this region and how the rest of the state. So I don't have one word. I have many, many words apparently. And I'll leave it to Taylor to try to figure out how to put it in. But that's going to be my lens is the governance structure we come up, this one that we need in this moment under these circumstances to get us through the future challenges.
Thank you, and that's very, very helpful, and I think maybe a way to sort of summarize that would be, does the current governance structure of the Met Council allow them to achieve the duties they've been legislatively tasked with, and do they do it in a competent manner, and if not, why, and then what can we do to address that? I mean, I think that, and I also really appreciated, Ms. Beckman, what you said, it also struck me that, how different, we always look at Portland as a peer city, right, in terms of its population, in terms of Fortune 500 companies, et cetera, but it is really different. And, the West has, because of history, has a different viewpoint about government and the role of government. And so I think it is important to understand the uniqueness of our region. Chair Cleveland.
Thank you, and I want to thank Ms. Beckman for your comments. I couldn't agree with you more. But I think when we're thinking about these values, we also have to be fair. When we are looking at some of the decisions that have most angered people about the Met Council, especially around Southwest Light Rail, some of the decisions that were made were not made by Met Council. They were made by a large county. To say it that way, on multiple votes, right, on multiple votes. So we have to be fair about how we're holding them accountable.
So thank you, Chair Cleveland. And again, I had some notes going into this too, and so then I would say that your comment, fits into something that I've been thinking about, which is, in this discussion, to identify what does the Met Council do well, so that we don't necessarily interfere with a success. Where does the Met Council have room for improvement? And what can we do to help it succeed to address those existing issues? And, I think there's so many issues around Southwest that we could get into, but it's an important reminder that under our current structure, right, counties are charged with some of these decisions around routes. And, then the Met Council has to implement it, and, there's been issues with the implementation as well. So, but I think it's important to identify, so what's going well, what's not, how do we how does our process, work with the success, but also the areas of improvement. I have Senator Pratt and then Ms. Paddock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to go back to Professor Orfield and Commissioner Bingham's comments, and then maybe touch a little bit on Mr. Rockwell's. It's interesting that we've been here listening to the testimony, and I walked away with a different perspective of what we understand the Met Council to be, right? I understand the Met Council to be more of an agency of the governor as we do the appointments, as it operates. And so I'm a little worried about, I guess I'd ask Commissioner Bingham to help define precedence, because it's my understanding that the very task of this task force is to kind of break it apart. Maybe not be constrained by precedent so that we continue to do the same thing over and over, but to actually be willing to try something new or look at, or think outside the box. And then to Mr. Rockwell's, before Commissioner Bingham hops on here, I would agree with you on nimble from an operating standpoint, but not from a strategic standpoint. The point of having flexible but stable strategies going forward, roadmaps, so to speak, is so that we aren't being swayed by short-term events. Whereas when you're an operator, say for Metro Transit, and you're dealing with weather, you're dealing with routes, you're dealing with, you have to be nimble as an operator. And I think it just goes to the very question of where should we be looking for the Met Council to operate and where we shouldn't. And so I think for me, that's a distinction. I agree with you on part of it, but not all of it. But I don't want to be constrained by precedents. I want us to be looking at all of the options available to us, because as we've said many times, the Met Council is a creation of the legislature. And we have to decide whether or not we're going to let it fly outside of our control, or whether we want to keep those reins around it. And it's going to be interesting to hear the conversation around staggered terms, because I think Professor Orfield has some history on that as well. So those are just my thoughts on the conversation so far.
Excellent. I don't know I know Ms. Paddock is queued up, but since Commissioner Bingham was referenced and also Mr. Rockwell, I'd give you, again, this is a discussion where we're kind of, imagine we're sitting in a coffee shop or somewhere, we're having a discussion.
So let me clarify. I was trying to surmise in one word what Professor Orfield was trying to do. And just to be fair, I would say authentic, Ms. Beckman, is the word that maybe you were thinking of, genuine or authentic, as to what we should be creating this council with. So maybe I had too much coffee today. But to your point, Senator Pratt, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the point of being here is to break this apart, to look, because I actually think that is kind of what the legislature started doing last year. It started giving direct appropriations to counties and to some of the agencies for what their duties were, because we weren't getting some of these visions and objective words that we were trying to put into one word. So I think that is what is starting to happen, and I think that is, in my opinion, that authentic, just natural process that is starting to happen between what the legislature is realizing local government does. And I think one of the biggest problems and issues that the Met Council has is it doesn't know what it is. Is it a local government? Is it a state agency? It's a chameleon. It's one thing when it wants to be. It's one thing when it wants to be something else. I think that's part of our goal and objective here, not today, but through this process, is to figure that out, because I think that's part of the problem.
Okay, now we're getting on a roll here. So, Ms. Paddock, I have not forgotten you, but I did want to have Mr. Rockwell, since you were referenced, and then so what we have then is after you, we'll have Ms. Paddock and then Professor Orfield. And then, Senator Coleman after that. So I better start writing this down, so I'm going to forget. Mr. Rockwell.
I think I agree with Senator Pratt on that point. I think, and I would pull in, I guess I wanted to explicitly pull in Representative Hornstein's point about that long-range ability to think long-range and long-range planning, right? Because I think what that nimbleness that we saw in other transit agencies during COVID wasn't just total opportunism. They had a real vision for how they wanted their transit agency to function, and then they had an opportunity to speed that up, right? But they had articulated what they wanted to accomplish, right? And so, for example, I'm having conversations within the Metropolitan, within Metro Transit right now, like what are our goals in terms of the speed of our arterial bus rapid transit? We don't have them. We don't have them. And so when given an opportunity to speed up an arterial bus rapid transit line, we have no framework in which to do that. No framework that is public, no framework that people have had that chance to react to. And so that ability to think long-term, that ability to have a plan, that then when we have the opportunity to move on that plan, I think is really important. And that planning process, that long-term visioning process, I think there are structural reasons why the Metropolitan Council and Metro Transit haven't been able to do that. One of them is they haven't had the funding, right? And so it's hard to think long-term when you don't have stable funding and you're looking at a fiscal cliff and so on and so forth. But, and that's kind of like structural and human psychology wrapped into one. But I think that's just kind of some nuance on my agreement with Senator Pratt's point. And I think one other, just a quick, maybe another discussion topic bouncing off of Representative Cleburne's point is that, one of the things that I think we're sort of talking around a little bit here is, in a conflict between a local government, county government, and Metropolitan Council government, who do we want to prevail? I mean, we have, so Representative Cleburne made that point that Hennepin County has a lot of say in what happens in our rail projects. Also, the alignment changed because St. Louis Park wanted the alignment to change, right? We have municipal consent. We have counties providing, initial planning for lines. Purple line, we've seen Ramsey County gave the purple line to the Metropolitan Council, and then 2 different jurisdictions have weighed in on what that alignment should be. And who do we want to have the say at the end of the day? Do we want to say, you know what, this is a regional project, and therefore I understand that you don't want this going through your jurisdiction, but the folks on the other end of the line need this to go through your jurisdiction, and therefore we're going to do that? Or do we want to say, no, the local government's decision-making is really important and outweighs our regional vision here? And that, I'm going to take a guess that not everyone in this room is going to agree on who should take precedent in a conflict there. But I do think that that's really important to have that discussion and to understand that that's part of what we're talking about here.
Excellent point. Ms. Paddock, you've been waiting patiently.
Yes, and I want to comment on the discussion as I see it evolving. I see that people are kind of saying the same thing in different ways. If we kind of divide the question into what is it, what kind of creature is this, and then what are its duties and how is it supposed to act? I mean, those are kind of 2 different things. And the first question is, what is it? And that is a function of who it's accountable to. In my view, I think that is the core question. If we could decide who is it accountable to, who does it answer to, then the rest of those things will kind of fall into place. Right now, it's accountable only to the governor of the state, period. Directly accountable to the governor.
We have the governor's appointee.
Right.
Ms. Paddock.
And there are proposals, obviously, to make it accountable to the general public, to appointed officials, to elected officials and whatever. But I think that is the core question. If we could decide who it's accountable to, then we'll be on our way.
Thank you, Ms. Paddock. And again, I'm just going to read from some notes that I had ahead of time, which I think you really articulated. So I wanted to also just chime in a little bit. So, you know, a question arises, who is the constituency of the Met Council? And does the governing structure of the Met Council effectively fit and serve that identified constituency? And we've had a couple of different ideas as to who that constituency is today. And then a corollary question to that is, who is the Met Council responsible to? And this gets to the point that Mr. Rockwell was making. The region, is it local governments, the public, business, special interest groups? You know, we have so many different stakeholders, environmental groups, for example. And what are the responsibilities to each of those? Housing groups, you know, people that from time to time show up at Met Council. So those are just a couple of questions, I think, that play off of both Mr. Rockwell and Ms. Paddock's. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't want to jump the line. I know there are other people who want to speak, but you left the legislature out of who are they accountable to?
Well,
Because,
of course.
I mean, here we sit.
Yeah. No, well, of course. I mean, there, you know, and I think the legislature I view as accountability to a much broader public. So we have a much broader public. But of course, I'll add that to the list. They're a creature of the legislature. And as I've often said, if there's a problem with the Met Council, then the legislature needs to fix it. So thank you for that clarification. I just wanted Commissioner Green to know that she is on the list, but we have Professor Orfield, Senator Coleman, Representative Weens as well, queued up. Professor Orfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've always been curious what the council is, but they did seem to answer my questions finally, and they said, like the Attorney General said, that they are not a state agency. The council said that, and what the council thinks, you know, is a valuable part of it, and the Attorney General said that they are not a state agency. The council also said in their testimony that they were that they were legitimate authority pursuant to a statute, Minnesota Section 645.023, which is an exception to the special law requirement. One of the questions I'd posed is, how can you be constitutional if the statute named you? It would be a special law that would be prohibited. But the week before the council was created in 1967, the legislature enacted a statute that exempted it from the special law requirement. And so I think what she was saying is that it's a local government. The council is a local government. And all local governments, the city of Minneapolis, the city of Burnsville, the city of Savage, they're all creatures of the state law. They're all creatures of the legislature formally by law. Every local government is a creature of the state. And just also, I think there's more in common with Portland than we think. They have an urban growth boundary. We have a metropolitan urban service area, which is quite similar. They tend to enforce theirs a little bit more rigorously and not allow septic sewers outside of them and the proliferation that we do, but they're almost identical in terms of legal concept. The legislature has a very similar school finance law. They have a similar system of local aids to local government politically. They're similar. We are the third widest region in the country. They are the second widest region in the country. There's a lot of similarities legally and structurally, but all local governments are creatures of the state law. And the council said, and the attorney said, it's not an agency. So I think we can only go forward with the idea that it's a local government, like a county or a city or a special district. Whether it's properly composed or not, we don't know whether that's okay. But I think that's what they said.
Well, we'll take that into consideration. Senator Coleman, you are next. Thank you very much, Senator.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the time. I was talking to someone right before I walked into this meeting and expressed my excitement for the possibilities that this task force has before us. I've served on a number of task forces, and I've observed even more. And this is the one I see with the most potential to actually do something and get creative. And so to echo Senator Pratt's comments, I think the worst thing we could do is to let, well, that's never been done before, stop our potential here and the ability to think outside the box and get creative. A lot of the ideas I have noodling around in my head, I've heard from the public, actually. They have the most creative proposals I've seen so far. And so I hope that we take this opportunity to really, think outside the box here. And I also am sincerely hopeful that the upcoming sessions that we have outside of the Capitol, that this will be a great opportunity to make sure we really hear from the cities and counties that are within the Met Council's purview. I come from a city council background. I served on the city of Chanhassen. And just to learn more about their perspective of how they can work better with the Met Council, areas that perhaps authority is being overstepped in their opinion. There's a number of times that our council will get creative with a proposal and we would hear back from staff, well, that's not something that the Met Council will allow. And so to learn from them, I really want to make sure our opportunities outside these walls will be for that. So I'm really excited for those and the work ahead.
Thank you so much, Senator. What's the name of the guy that's, Okay. Well, I reminded of, thank you for that. I know that, look back already, Senator, thank you for that reminder about that we've, the public, the ideas we're getting from the public. Look at the proposal from Mr. Shady and Mr. Adair that was shared with us several weeks ago. We have a number of people who have been regulars here and have testified, and I look forward to hearing much more when we hit the road, so to speak, and we'll even hear from one of our colleagues today in the state legislature. So, I think that's a really good point, well taken. That let's think outside the box, and let's really the public really is onto this and really has a lot of ideas, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of those. Representative Weens and then Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as I'm contemplating Mr. Rockwell, Ms. Beckman, Ms. Paddock's comments, I think about the scope of what we're trying to solve, and especially the resources we have, which is, I think, the limiting factor is time. In my brain, there's either a linear process or a circular process. And the linear process, if you define, let's solve for the simple. Let's solve for all the things we don't like that the Met Council does. So we could tame the creature. So we just fix those, and that's our proposal. Maybe a more complicated thing is taking a look at the Met Council, how it operates. Is it an agency? Defining more of what it is as the creature, maybe not just taming it, but riding it, and solving a little for the near future. And make certain it's got the right authorities to do and be nimble for the things we want it to be. Maybe it's a planning agency to find that. The last scope question is the wicked complex one. And that's, this thing doesn't work. We're going to rebuild the creature. We're going to Frankenstein this thing and make it into what we want it to be for the next 30 years. So we're looking way into the future, what we think future problems are. In that, I'm wondering how far we can get in the sense of having a decision point from this committee on which problem we're solving for, the simple, the complicated, or the wicked complex, because that will inform which values we're going to use to screen and then also evaluate these things. I think we can still gain more information and cyclically come back to this, but we're going to have to figure out with that time constraint what we can actually bring back to the legislature by the time we're back in session. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Weens. Right. What is the problem we're solving for? I mean, I think, or the issue before us that we want to solve. I think that's a good, what I appreciate about Representative Weens, he's a systems guy. And so, I think just breaking it down into the three areas that you said, but bringing it back to what are we solving for, I think is very, very helpful. I think we all each have our ideas. I'll call on you, Chair Cleaborn, after we hear from Commissioner Green, joining us remotely. Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. So just one quick note, being from that large county, I wanted to just mention my complete lack of energy for the blame game on problems of previous projects. Dissertations could be written. I think what our honor and task to focus on is designing a structure that has the motivations that we want it to have and the regional vision that we certainly need it to have. And others have talked about motivations and accountability. I'd like to add in on our list of values, proportionality and representativeness. For regional balance, we want a council that reflects the region's population.
Thank you, Commissioner Green, and I appreciate that last comment you made, and I think there's a broader issue too when we mention counties, and one that I think we'll be able to dive into a little bit more in depth on November 29th when we hear from Denver. But counties are very, very critical in just about every piece that the Met Council is involved with. Local governments, of course, as well. We heard from Mayor Hovland about issues there and partnerships. But, counties are critical. We've set up a system where counties are intricately involved in planning transit, for example. They interact with the housing work that the Met Council does, and a number of things. And so I think it's really important. We've got a couple of county commissioners here with us, and I just want to underscore, that piece of it because, there's a whole history which we won't get into after at this meeting, but I think maybe it bears some mention at future meetings. But, I was part of, when we passed the 2008 transportation bill, there was a whole discussion about the metro sales tax. And, at that point, that was devolved to the counties. That was a decision that was made very quickly in 2008. And that's the system we're living with now. And it created CTIB, and then CTIB was dissolved. So we've had a whole, back and forth with counties. And so, I don't know, Commissioner Green, this was pent up in me for a while. And I think, we really do need to sort of dig into sort of the county role in all of this. And so I'm prepping everyone for your thoughts and comments. I think we're going to spend a lot of time on this on the 29th.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a note to the note taker. It's designing a system with the motivations that we want it to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Green.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Chair Cleaver, you've been waiting patiently.
No, and I think Commissioner Green just put a fine point on it. So I intentionally didn't name the county, right? Because that is a role that the county has been given.
Correct.
And it's the county's job to advocate for the citizens of that county, of which I am a resident, right? So the whole idea of this conversation being surrounded by blame is the very reason I think that we're here. Things didn't go well as some people had wanted it to go around particular projects, and we have to get away from blaming, right? This is a structure and a creature that is doing what we've asked it to do within the confinement that we've given them. So my question is not about blaming entities, blaming individuals, or any of that. But as a legislative body, the question I have is, have we given these state employees, right? I mean, this, however you define them, as a state agency, a local government, all of that is in our hands about what do we want and what power and constraints are we putting on this entity to do the work that we're asking them to do. And I mean, if I had started a tick list of how many times we've blamed in this committee, that list would be huge. And in fact, it's the legislature that's in control here as far as what we've allowed and what we've not allowed. And so the question is, what do we want as a legislative body? And it's not to blame the counties, it's not to blame Met Council. I mean, the other piece is so much of our conversation has been solely transit-focused, right? So blame and transit are kind of the commonalities that I'm hearing over and over and over. And I don't think that that's, I'm very concerned that we are going to damage other parts of the Met Council that are working well, and that we are going to damage our ability to get federal funding because we're in a space where somebody wants to blame someone, and that's not what I want to see. So anyway, I know that's a little bit rambling, but it's the major concern that I have.
Thank you, Chair Cleaver. I'll just return to a couple of questions I mentioned earlier. What does the Met Council do well so that we make sure not to interfere with that success? Where does the Met Council have room for improvement? And what can we do to help it succeed or address existing issues? I don't think that's a blame game. I think that's looking at an issue, evaluating what works and what doesn't work, and trying to fix something perhaps that isn't working well. So, you know, you are absolutely correct, Chair Cleaver, and I'm glad you brought us back to the principle that this is a creature of the legislature, and if it's broken or needs changes, if it needs to be more future-looking and there's past structures that need to be updated, it is ultimately the legislature's responsibility. And that is what I think, and Senator Coleman, I appreciate your talking about creativity and thinking outside the box, because unlike previous efforts to look at this issue, and we'll be hearing shortly about staggered terms, this is a legislatively created and directed task force with many legislators on it, but also many people that have a stake in the Met Council. And so hopefully, again, through this conversation about goals and values, you know, we can come up with, you know, that's the piece that we really want to focus on today. And of course, I understand that we veer into structures, we veer into sort of, you know, getting into people's preferences around that. But I'm glad that we've kept it at a pretty high level today. You know, I think this is very informative in terms of where we want to move forward. I'll take a couple more comments, and then we'll move on. And of course, we'll write up these notes. This is the beginning of the conversation. It's not the end. I think it's going to be very, very important that we return to some of the issues and questions that have been raised. And I saw that Commissioner Bingham wanted to make a point. So anyone else before we move on? We'll have Commissioner Bingham, and then we'll give the last word to our good mayor from Edina.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to say that the counties are ready, willing, and prepared to talk about our role and how we interact with the Met Council, and happy to work with staff on identifying key staff within the counties that can testify and present to this task force.
Right. And that might be as soon as 3 weeks from now. So thank you very much, Commissioner Bingham. We really appreciate that. Mayor Hovland, you get the last word here for this part of the discussion.
Mr. Chair, I think your words about taking a careful cautionary sort of approach are really appropriate, because as I've listened to some of the conversation this morning, and I've looked around the room, other than Commissioner Bingham, I've been on the tab for over 10 years. So I'm there every month and working in preparation for meetings, all of it around use of federal highway trust fund monies. But nonetheless, you get an immersion in everything else too. So this becomes kind of a cautionary note, and consistent with what you said, is let's be really careful here about what we do, that we look at all of this really carefully and be mindful of the fact that other people in not too recent the past, have looked at this carefully, that were very competent. The Citizens League, the governor had a blue ribbon panel run by Mary Liz Holberg that I happened to be part of, that all came to certain conclusions that involved very little change in the existing structure, or how the Met Council operates. So I'm hopeful as we go along here that from a practical standpoint, I can tell you what I've learned over there with respect to particular issues. With regard to, I know an issue that's important to Mary Paddock, and that is building consensus. I've seen it work firsthand at the TAB, but it doesn't always work in the real world. You know, I mean, we've got 34 people over there, and twice we've determined how to spend federal money, and everybody's approved of that process, regardless of what their view of the world is. We know that as we work in the worlds that we operate in, that if you get 2/3 of the people going with you, that's the best you're going to do. So just a cautionary note on all of it. And it'd be a perfect world if we could always build consensus. To Mr. Rockwell's point, you know, if sometimes you need to do some things that you have to do for the betterment of the region that may be at odds with a particular local unit of government. And as between the counties and the cities and the Met Council, I see a pretty good working relationship. There's this constant tension, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, in the region over expansion, for parts of our region that are growing, or parts of the 7-county metro area that are growing, and in the more traditional internal urban parts that are interested in preservation and expansion of systems that function well in those urban environments. And then we have folks that are really interested in, this is the most popular category, is non-motorized transportation. Every county, every city, we get more applications around non-motorized than anything else. So you've got folks that want to expand. You've got folks that want to build what we got, make what we have better, and make sure it's durable. And that's just part of this whole conversation that goes on at the TAB and then emanates up to the Met Council. So as we go along here, as I say, I hope I can add some value that way in telling you what those sort of real world experiences have been, whether it's a progressive person that's a transit advocate or it's a more conservative outlying county commissioner. We've been able to reach time and again an understanding of how we're going to spend that $300 million that comes to the region every couple of years. And I think there's some real value in the model we have, so let's just be careful with it.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor, and you have a lot of experience in this area, and so I'm glad that you're here. Okay, members, this was very helpful. We'll Ms. Kohler will send around the notes so we have a kind of a record of what was said, and we will be revisiting a lot of these points, and I'll really do some digesting of all this as well. So again, each and every one of you, I think, I had an opportunity to talk today, who are present, and we had Commissioner Green as well, and we appreciate everybody's participation in this discussion. And again, really glad that everybody had a chance to talk and give your opinions. So maybe Mayor Hovland, your last comment was a nice transition into sort of the next, and Ms. Paddock, thank you also for framing us up at the beginning. This was a transition, I think, into the next part of our agenda. We want to, again, as we're approaching these different models, and I think that a point was made about understanding what others communities are doing, but also understanding our own uniqueness as a region. I think it's important that we do look, Mayor Hovland, at the conclusion that was made by the two most recent groups that have taken this on. We had a presentation. We had presentations earlier from Commissioner Holberg about the Blue Ribbon Commission. We also had the Citizens League come in and present about their report. And both of those did talk about staggered terms. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking a little about that as an option. We talked about election as an option last time. We're going to talk about a COG next time. But sandwiched in between, we'll take a look in a little more specific way, this recommendation that was put forward by two previous commissions. And so we've asked Ms. Nauman to come up. She's very familiar with this concept, has promoted it at the legislature. And I know we have at least one member of the public or legislator that wanted to comment. So we'll ask you to come up first, Ms. Nauman, and then we'll have Representative Elkins come as well, Vice Chair Elkins. Welcome to the committee. Thank you so much for just overall your work in the region, but your work in specific on this issue, and maybe just walk us through this proposal, this idea, and we'll have some discussion.
Sure. Thank you.
Please state your name for the record.
All right, of course. Mr. Chair and members, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Patricia Nauman. I'm the Executive Director of Metro Cities. Our formal name is the Association of Metropolitan Municipalities. And I appreciate, again, the opportunity to talk to you today about Metro Cities. I will just say, work with the council and also our position on staggered terms and on governance in general, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So just as by way of brief background, Metro Cities is a region-wide lobbying association that represents cities, the shared interests of cities in the metro area at the legislature, the executive branch, and notably the Metropolitan Council. The association was created in the same relative timeframe that the Metropolitan Council was created back in the early 60s, or late 60s, early 70s, for the purposes of ensuring that the shared interests of metropolitan cities were considered and represented at the Metropolitan Council. And this really was due to the legislation that created the council and its the strong and specific nexus that exists between the work of city governments and the Metropolitan Council as per basically the council's purpose. So due to the nature of the council's role as it was created by the legislature and the close nexus of city and regional responsibilities and functions, city officials in the region do consider themselves to be a primary constituent of the Metropolitan Council, and they do take a very keen interest in its governance, as well as the scope of the council's activity, authority, policies, and funding. And this has been true throughout this tenure of Metro Cities history, going back again to the late 60s and early 70s. So to this end, I'll just add here that Metro Cities, we are, of course, we're a lobbying association. We have a slate of legislative policies, and we have a complete section devoted just to Metropolitan Council funding, policies, fees, the whole banana, and that does also include governance, which I'll get to here in a moment. I will just add that the city positions on the council, Metro Cities generally does recognize the importance of having a regional government. We support the existence of a regional government for the purposes of facilitating region-wide planning and the provision of those services that cannot be as effectively or efficiently provided by either the state or local governments. That again, goes back to the purpose. And I would say our policies have pretty much adhered to recognizing the council's original function and purpose and recognizing and supporting that. Cities officials also tend to be very clear about the council's limited role. And again, our policies, if you look through them, they really do emphasize throughout the need for the Metropolitan Council to work collaboratively with local governments, again, due to the nexus of the work. With respect to Metro Cities governance policy, the association has long supported appointment of members by the governor with 4-year staggered terms. The association did initiate legislation actually back in 2008. It did pass the legislature and it was vetoed by then Governor Pawlenty. And of course, staggered terms are sometimes a difficult thing for governors because, of course, it takes away authority. The position of the association on staggered terms are basically that they would help to stabilize any ideological, shifts on the council, which cities believe are not conducive to the council's role as a long-range planning body and provider of basic regional infrastructure that must be well-coordinated, cost-effective, and efficient. Staggered terms also have established precedent for many entities in the government arena, and they tend to be recognized as a good government practice. Metro Cities positions, when we have talked about staggered terms with our members, they certainly recognize that staggered terms would provide a continuity of knowledge on the Metropolitan Council, If you think about the fact that every 4 years, a governor can change, and then you have a whole slate of new members potentially, and that sort of kind of gets rid of all the knowledge that existed, and sometimes it takes members, frankly, a couple of years to even get up to speed. So the staggered terms would provide for that continuity of knowledge. They also provide for more diversity of perspectives and would provide broader accountability, maintaining legislative consent, but not having the council be accountable to one particular governor. And this is sometimes why people don't support them, of course. Sometimes it's governors. Staggered terms could also serve, sometimes I know there's a critique of the council that they are over-reliant on staff, and certainly in our discussions on staggered terms, that has been a key point, that staggered terms would help reduce that over-reliance on staff by, again, providing Metropolitan Council members more opportunity to dig into issues and to get to know them more deeply. I will just add, and you've talked about this in this task force, but Metro Cities, again, we've long supported staggered terms, and we have recognized that our position is also consistent with other entities, including the Citizens League, the League of Women Voters, and the Blue Ribbon Commission that have also, that have included a wide range of stakeholders. I know you've been talking about, again, those studies, but those have also come up with similar positions to this association. I also will just add, in addition to staggered terms, and this has been a very important piece for cities because, again, we want the council, and I know Mayor Hovland just emphasized this a few moments ago, the need to work collaboratively. Metro Cities policies do support strongly statutory changes that would increase transparency in the selection process for Metropolitan Council members. The nominating committee right now, there is no law that requires a governor to discuss who has been recommended. It's a very small committee. We do support expanding that committee to at least 13 members, with the majority of those members being local officials, with a public comment period. First of all, publicizing the names, of members who are nominated, and then a public comment period for those members who are nominated. Metro Cities believes that this would increase collaboration and provide more rigor and transparency in the selection process in general. Mr. Chair and members, I will leave it there, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Appreciate that. I think what we'll do, we'll have a couple questions, and then we'll have Representative Elkins come up. Professor Orfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was looking back at the history of the Met Council, and in 1967, the record says that not only the Citizens League, but it said the Hennepin and Ramsey County League of Municipalities and the Metropolitan section of the League of Municipalities all favored strongly direct election. And the Ogdahl-Frenzel bill, which was sort of the Metro bill. The bill that prevailed was the Rosenmeyer bill, which was a bill that was authored by rural members of the legislature. And at that time, the League of, I guess it was the Hennepin and Ramsey County League of Municipalities, and also the Metropolitan section of the League of Municipalities thought that not having it being elected would give the rural parts of the state too much say in the operation of the council. And then in 1994, the Association of Metropolitan Municipalities, or whether it was Metro Cities, I can't remember, they were in favor of it being directly elected during the last big reorganization. And there was quite a lot of, I was involved in that, quite a lot of hearings. How did this change? I mean, how did this change over time, do you think?
Mr. Chair and members, thank you for the question. When Metro Cities was created as the Association of Metropolitan Municipalities in 1974. Its predecessors being the Metro section of the league, and I believe, as you stated, Mr. Orfield, the Hennepin County and Ramsey Leagues are predecessors of this association and not this association. So I can't speak to those policies, but I do know that the association did have a brief stint with an elected council back before the merger. Once that merger occurred, and I have studied the policies from that time, basically what the consistency and support has been for staggered terms and not for an elected council. That is no longer a position of the association.
One quick follow-up, Professor.
The council has said it's a local government, and your entities, all the municipalities are local government. It's kind of like a municipality as a local government. What does the Metro Cities think? Do they think local governments that have broad discretion and taxing powers, should they be appointed or elected?
Ms. Nallen.
Can you repeat the question?
Is it the council that said it's a local government? You're a local government. You're an association of local governments. Do you think that local governments that have broad discretion and taxing power, you have a position on whether they ought to be elected or appointed?
We don't have a position, I mean, Metro City's positions on municipal revenues do certainly acknowledge the taxing authority that local governments do have, but we don't have a position that speaks directly to that
Okay,
issue.
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have Ms. Beckman and then Representative Elkins.
Ms. Alman, I appreciate the recommendation, and largely because you identify a problem of governors changing, and then knowledge drain happens as council members leave, and that, like, you state a problem and then a proposed solution for it. And the thing that I am grappling with this committee is, I think we don't have a shared understanding of what the problem is that we're solving. And while I appreciate the exercise earlier to get to shared values, I wouldn't mind a conversation on what the problem is we're trying to fix with the new governance structure. Because if it is that council members aren't responsive to constituents, then make them full-time and give them staff. And if it is that they can tax and they're not elected, then like divorce the legislative body approving the amount of tax that can be raised by the Met Council. Like, I feel like we're all sort of circling around, as Sam put it, like we're, the problem and we're not naming it. And so I would love a little exercise of, what do we think we're solving? Is it because Hennepin County has too much say? Is it because a city doesn't have enough say? Like, I think that would help me figure out what governance structure would line up with that problem the way Ms. Nauman's recommendation lines up with the problem that metropolitan cities sees in the governance structure.
I love that idea. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's kind of part two, perhaps, of the discussion we had earlier. So I appreciate that a lot. Senator Pratt.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And this discussion has kind of, maybe brought one additional value that I might throw out there. And that is, I think the Met Council should be nonpartisan. We have a number of Met Council reps that have transitioned from the Dayton administration to the Walz administration. There's been some stability, at least through this period. But if the governor were to change parties, I think one of the things that the staggered terms brings up is that stability to maybe, for a brief period of time, mute the partisanship. But my concern is that as long as the governor is the appointing authority, there will always be a sense of partisanship. And so when I listen to Ms. Beckman, and I appreciate it, because your comments really kind of brought this forward to me, is what are the problems that we're trying to solve? And I think what we're trying to say is we want a Met Council that is accountable to its constituency. And we've mentioned it a number of times. We have to define a constituency of the Met Council.
Right.
And I think I want to thank you for your comments, because I just want to at least get that out there, is we should be looking at a methodology that is nonpartisan, that results in it. Because when we look at the metropolitan area, Senator Coleman's area, Carver County is the fastest growing county in the state. Lakeville has been the fastest growing city in the state. Scott County, wedged between the two, we've seen tremendous growth. In 2020, we had 1,000 new homes being built just in my part of Scott County. And so we need to have a way to recognize that, and this maybe goes to the flexibility comments earlier. We need to have we need that stability, and I think staggered terms answers that, but we also need to put that in context of maybe more global changes that I think the partisanship gets in the way of some of the credibility that the Met Council has. And that's one of the problems I'd like to solve.
Excellent. We're going to have, okay, well, this was in response to you. We'll have Ms. Beckman, and then we'll go to Commissioner Bingham.
Thank you. And I appreciate the nonpartisanship. And I think it is, it's why the Senate has confirmation power over the council members and the council chair. And I think, it has been demonstrated in the past that the Senate is not afraid to turn over one of the governor's appointments. And I think that, when we talk about accountability, I really do believe that Senate committee check on council members and the council chair is an important flex, frankly, of the legislature to hold the governor in check of who they're appointing, how partisan they are, what consensus building. I mean, Wendy Wolf is a great example. She has been held over from the Dayton administration to here, and, is maybe not a member of the governor's party. And so I think there are examples of where that's happened, and I do think, though, that the Senate could play a larger role in holding council members accountable for their decisions. And I think that the authors of that put that check and balance in there were really smart to be able to have that check on the governor.
Okay, we'll go to Commissioner Bingham, Commissioner Green. We'll give Chair Cleavorn the last word, and then we'll hear from, we'll give Ms. Paddock the last word, and then we'll hear from Representative Elkins. Commissioner Bingham.
I'm going to move on from the partisan, nonpartisan comments, but I'm going to talk about what Senator Pratt said about the constituency, because I think that's really important, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to say that I've said that the Met Council's constituency is the region, and I think when you look at whether it's the legislature we've heard today that the council is responsible to, well, they're elected officials from the region and that serve in the legislature, right? And I think you look at the local government officials, myself and city officials, mayors, township, whatever, that's also the constituency. I think where the breakdown also happens when the process is the way it is. There's a little bit, I actually will say there's a lot of, we don't get a lot of say in that process. And when what happens in Carver County is different than what happens in Hennepin or Ramsey or Washington, it's hard to be responsive to that constituency when maybe the members don't show up, don't respond, and we have no recourse other than calling Senator Coleman or Senator Pratt to say, please vote against the governor's recommendations. So I have a concern about that process. So maybe I think that's what I would say as a local official that I think is an issue that probably needs to be addressed in that conversation, because what transit looks like in Washington County looks different in Ramsey and Hennepin. And we had that conversation all last spring discussing the transportation bill. And the chair is well aware of that. I know Senator Pratt was well aware of that in those conversations too. So I think that's the overall discussion when you're coming from metro area local government. And so I think responsiveness to that constituency, well, that constituency are local government officials and that region. And we're responsible to the same residencies and the same constituencies. So I think looking at how that system works to reflect who is on that council definitely needs to be discussed.
Okay, so members, we have three more people, and I'm going to ask, I want to make sure, so we have Commissioner Green, we have Chair Cleavorn, and Ms. Paddock. I want to make sure that we're having, if we're in the discussion part, that's good, but I want to make sure that, does anyone else, or the three people that I'd mentioned, do you have questions specifically of Ms. Nauman? So if you do, okay. So Commissioner Green, is your question to Ms. Nauman also?
It is not, it's more to the general discussion.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Since Chair Cleavorn and Ms. Paddock have questions specifically for Ms. Nauman, I'm going to bump you ahead in the line here. And so we'll hear from Chair Cleavorn, Ms. Paddock, and then we'll conclude with you, Commissioner Green, for your overall comment, okay? Chair Cleavorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Nauman, I appreciate your testimony today. In your document that was provided to the committee, you state that you would want to go from 7 to 13 members. I would like for you to maybe give us a little bit of your rationale of going from 7 to 13, and that the majority of those would be local elected officials. So maybe in light of the conversation that we've heard here, that local voice doesn't have enough, or if you can maybe explain that. And then when you talk about the 21 days prior to final selection to have public comment, maybe some rationale about that as well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Representative Chair Claiborne, just very briefly on the nominating committee process. So current law does call for the 7-member nominating committee, and my recollection is it's 3 of those members need to be local officials. Metro cities, again, of course, we are a city association, and recognizing, again, the nexus of work between cities and the council, cities do want to have more input. You know, that position generally comes from wanting cities to have a better opportunity for input in a statutory way. Expanding that committee from 7 to 13 members, my recollection from discussions we've had when that policy was adopted is that it really does allow for just greater participation in general, both from citizen members that could be appointed as well as local officials. So it allows for that broader opportunity. You know, not saying that all 7 members, it's a small committee, should be local officials, so broadening it out to make sure that there's enough of a voice, but while providing a voice for others as well. The 21-day committee, you know, the 21-day comment period, I would have to go back and maybe look at some of the discussion as to why 21 days. I think it was something when we were looking at actually having a bill introduced, it was a way to provide enough opportunity, but not so much, you know, time to go by, recognizing, I think, other laws that govern when a governor is required to appoint members is my recollection of that, but I would be happy to get you more information on that as well.
Representative Cleavorn, did you have a follow-up? Okay, thank you for your question. We'll go to Ms. Paddock.
Yes, Ms. Now.
Thank you.
Did I hear you correctly when you said that you thought that staggered terms might help the issue of over-reliance on staff?
Mr. Chair and Ms. Paddock, that has been, so when positions have been discussed in the association, that certainly is something that cities sometimes say is that there's sometimes too much reliance on staff. It's somewhat anecdotal. But if you provide for staggered terms, if you think about the fact that members are appointed every 4 years, and again, if a governor changes hands, that means a whole, 16, 17-member slate of new members. It often takes, the Metropolitan Council is a major regional body, so it takes members time to get up to speed. And if you're having to do that every 4 years potentially, it just sort of by default requires the Metropolitan Council to be more reliant on staff because you don't have enough time for members to get up to speed before they might be off the council.
Thank you,
So,
Mr. Chair. I raised the question because that certainly is a hue and cry in the community. I don't know if it is elsewhere, but the perception that the Met Council is very much staff-driven.
Yeah, I definitely think that this is a good discussion to have, for sure. Okay, so what we're going to do here is have a concluding comment for discussion from Commissioner Green, and then I'm going to call on Representative Elkins. Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have actually 3 comments, but I will cover them relatively quickly. I'm just responding and cogitating on what's been shared. This has been a really interesting conversation, so thank you, everybody. I wanted to touch base on Mayor Hovland on the remarks that you made about past committees and that essentially that there's a reason why these previous groups haven't proposed change. And I'm just going to sort of plant a flag for a different interpretation of what's happening there, which is that there is an increasing urgency for change and growing frustration and real hunger, and that maybe that set point hasn't been reached in the past and now has been reached, and that's a question. I'm not saying that I know it has been reached, but I just want to offer a different interpretation of the series of committees that have existed that have not necessarily proposed change. Also wanted to comment on this notion of the constituency and join with various folks who have remarked that this is a really important question. In my mind, the question of constituency is who are the members answerable to? Who gets to say, we don't like the job that you're doing? As an elected official myself, I acknowledge that there's a balance between my constituency, that is those who can unelect me, and the needs of the larger region, that's the county board that I serve on, that as I go about my work, there's I think a healthy tension between those two, and I think about that for myself as a leader. Like, am I just about getting, more libraries in District 3, or am I thinking about the needs for libraries across Hennepin County and what the sort of overall formula should be? And so I want us to, as we talk about constituency, let's be careful about what we're asking. Is it like who can give them the cane and pull them back? Or is it like who are they serving, which may be a broader answer. And then I'll highlight, maybe perhaps in that vein, that counties are nonpartisan. Our elections are nonpartisan. And I think that has contributed to counties' broad general ability to avoid some of the rancor and gridlock that's plagued bodies that do have partisan elections. And so I just highlight that as I think a positive example of nonpartisan public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thanks for your engagement with this conversation. Okay, so very helpful. I want to also thank Ms. Nauman for her comments, and there has been legislation in the last session introduced on this issue, and so folks can sort of take a look at that. And this is definitely, I think, something this committee should be considering as we move forward. So as it has been in the past, an issue that has been raised in previous efforts to look at governance. So we do have someone who has signed up to comment specifically on this piece of the agenda. And of course, we'll conclude with, as we normally do, with just general public comments. But Commissioner Elkins wanted to speak specifically to this issue, and we appreciate you being here today, and you've been at a number of our other meetings, and I know this is an issue you have really been engaged in over many years, the whole Metropolitan Council question. And I know you come to us with a local government background and also have served on the Met Council. So welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record, and
State
very
Representative
interested to hear
Steve
from you.
Elkins from Bloomington, and I'm a known quantity to most of the people on this group, but just a thumbnail for those who aren't familiar with me. But I've had an association in one way or another with the Metropolitan Council since I was appointed to its Transportation Advisory Board as a citizen at large member back in about 1996. And did that for about 5 years. At the time, I was first a Traffic and Transportation Advisory Commissioner in Bloomington. The city traffic engineer, observing that I had a background and interest in transportation. I'm a transportation economist by education and moved here 39 years ago to set airfares for Republic Airlines. But that time I was a Traffic and Transportation Committee member, went on to be a planning commissioner. I served on the tab for about 5 years. When I was elected to the Bloomington City Council in 2001, I served for about 8 years on the Met Council's Land Use Advisory Committee. During my time as a city council member in Bloomington, was also very actively engaged in the Metro Cities and League of Minnesota Cities transportation committees. And then in 2011, Governor Dayton appointed me to the Met Council itself. The first several years, I served as the chair of the Transportation Committee for the Met Council. Did that through both terms of the Dayton administration, and when the second term there expired is when I ran for and was elected to the Minnesota House of Representatives, where I've served on the Transportation Committee, and for my first 2 terms was the vice chair of the Local Government Committee, which had jurisdiction over the Met Council while it existed. And also been a member of the Standing Legislative Coordinating Commission on Metropolitan Governance, which reviews the Met Council's budget every year. So I go way back on this stuff. And today what I mostly wanted to do is just mostly second all of the comments that Ms. Nauman made. But, you know, do that from the perspective of someone who has been inside the belly of the beast, so to speak. It was my observation that, you know, Mayor Hovland will attest to this as well, is that, you know, many of the processes that the Met Council has oversight committee, especially in its role as the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the region, are Byzantine. It takes a new Met Council member a long time to get up to speed. So when there is wholesale change in the council, as there has historically been, you know, basically by the time a new member who doesn't have the kind of background that I had coming into the role, you know, by the time they're up to speed, understand how things work, have built the relationships needed to become effective, a new governor comes along, and all of that institutional knowledge that has been accumulated is lost. From on the council that I first during Dayton's first term, the council that I served on had only one carryover from the Pawlenty administration. It was my good friend Wendy Wolf, who was remarkable in her longevity with the organization because she was one of only two members of the body that were carried over from the Dayton administration to the Walz administration. As Ms. Nauman has stated, it was my experience that because, it's been my observation from having served in numerous government bodies, task forces, work groups, whenever all of the institutional knowledge resides in the staff, the processes become extremely staff-centric. And the Metropolitan Council, I would say, you know, in my 25 years of public service and various types of roles, the Met Council was the most staff-driven organization that I have ever been a member of. So her comments in that regard were spot on. The other thing that I would say, you know, I came to the council after having served 9 years in local government as a city council member and having had experience on Met Council advisory committees. And I worked very closely with my cities. Bloomington had a standing monthly meeting they called their regional government meeting, where staff met with their Met Council rep and their MAC representative just to make sure that the city and the regional bodies were aligned. During my time on the Met Council, the city manager in Edina, Scott Neal, set up a similar monthly meeting where I met with the staffs of Edina, Richfield, and Hopkins as well. And so but in many of the other parts of the region, I would say if you look back at the membership of the Met Council over the last, several administrations, there have been appointments that any normal person looking at the roster would say, oh yeah, that's a patronage appointment. And there were some on my council. All of those people were very intelligent. They brought important life experiences to the table. But when I would go out and I would talk to the local representatives who were represented by those people, they always expressed the same sense of disenfranchisement that Commissioner Bingham has experienced. And so I also think that it's extremely important in the appointment process that local governments, be very involved and feel bought into the appointment process. The council, the vast majority of the work that it does is done in cooperation with the cities and counties. The counties play a primary role in the planning and implementation of transportation projects. The cities have control over land use. If the council cannot work effectively with the region, cities, and counties, it cannot be effective. And so I'll say, it's going to kind of bleed into some of the general discussion you're having here as well. But in my time involved in the Met Council, the council has always bent over backwards to have a consensus-driven process, to collaborate with the cities and counties. So let's just use the transitway planning process as an example here. During my time on the council actually commissioned a consultant to go out and survey metropolitan planning organizations around the country to come back to us and report on how do other regions prioritize and plan their transit projects. And there are a variety of different models. And at the end of the presentation, I myself asked, well, how would you characterize the planning process in the Twin Cities? It's just not written down anywhere. And so what I would tell you is what the de facto process is that it's up to the counties if they want a new transitway that is going to have a color attached to it. It's up to the county to develop the project to the point where they have a consensus with both the city and the cities that the transitway will pass through within the county about what is the route going to be and what is the mode going to be, what the key constraint being that we have built all of our major transitway projects in the region using federal money. And if you're going to get federal money, your project has to meet the Federal Transit Administration's cost-effectiveness indication criteria. So one of the things that the county has to do is demonstrate that their locally preferred alternative will meet the FTA's cost-effectiveness criteria to qualify for federal funding for half or so of the funding. And only when a county can, usually acting as its regional railway authority, can demonstrate that it has the supports of its cities and has putting forth a proposal that at least on a pro forma basis will meet the FTA CEI criteria, only then can the county nominate that project to the Met Council for inclusion in the region's transportation plans. That's not written down anywhere. Okay, but that's the way it works, and you could talk to anybody who is intimately familiar with the process, and they will tell you that that's how it works. A project does not come forward until it meets that criteria. So a couple meetings ago, you had a discussion of the municipal consent process. And it's because the municipal consent process is not contained within Chapter 473 of the Metropolitan Land Planning Act, which I know backwards and forwards at this point, I was never aware of the fact that cities and counties don't actually have a veto over transit planning. The council has to consult with them. If a city or a county objects, they have to have a hearing. But in the end, the decision is up to the council itself. And in my 8 years on the Met Council, I never understood that because it was never explained to us that way. To the council, having a consensus is so important that they treated the municipal consent process as if cities and counties had a veto, when in reality they didn't.
We have one question two questions, and then we do need to get to public testimony and towards adjournment. So I'm going to take the two questions I have, and that is from Professor Orfield and Mayor Hovland. Professor Orfield.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Elkins, you have a kind of unique viewpoint of this from being a municipal official and then being at the council and being in the legislature. So you've seen how this works together. I remember talking to you in the past, and the council is appointed by the governor. The members are confirmed by the Senate. The council chair sits in the governor's cabinet. Were you surprised when the council said it is not a state agency and the Attorney General said it couldn't be a state agency?
Representative Elkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll tell you what my personal experience was again, okay? During my first term on the Met Council, Sue Haig was the chair, a very effective chair, but she at the beginning of that term, she made it very clear that she was very proud to be a member of the governor's cabinet. and that if anyone should ask any of us, who is the Met Council accountable to, or who is the accountable party, that we should say that the governor is the person who we're accountable to, and if they have any complaints about the operations of the council, they should direct them to the governor. I would say that I have never seen a governor held accountable for the performance of the council, but that was the party line answer.
Could I ask this one follow-up?
Very quick, because
Very quick
we
follow-up.
have two more people, and then we'll
So-
have to end.
Having been a member of the Bloomington City Council, would you say that the activities of the Metropolitan Council are municipal-like in character? Are they like what it's like are they like a city, or are they more like an agency? What do you think?
I think I would probably give you the same answer that you got from Met Council staff a couple of meetings ago. It's a creature of the legislature, and it's neither fish nor fowl.
Okay, Mayor Hovland and was it Representative Kosnick? Okay, great, and then we'll have to move on at that point.
Thank you,
Mayor
Mr. Chair.
Hovland.
I think Professor Orfield said it well. You've had a unique set of experiences. So as you sit here today, having had this great expansive experience in dealing with the Met Council, what are your personal thoughts on what you would do if you were involved in this task force in terms of recommendations on refinements, significant changes? What are the opportunities you see here that are important for this task force to be considering?
Representative Elkins.
I've been sitting and listening, and it's been a fascinating conversation. I think we're not going to have time to. I would like to come back and give some broader comments about, but we're kind of at the end of the day today, so I don't want to really launch into too much of it now. But I would be happy to come back and share some of those impressions when there's more time.
Thank you. So you can see everyone's intrigued with you, Representative Elkins. Last comment or question from Representative Kosnick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the comments of Representative Elkins. Just general comments on the discussion that we're having about staggered terms and the nominating process. And I had attempted to introduce a bill, and there's been many bills introduced to address staggered terms and the nominating process. But the bill I introduced didn't have everything as I would do it today with a little bit more knowledge, but I think the purpose was, and hopefully the task force and the legislature can get to that, because I think it has some bipartisan support and sounds like there's some support here in this task force. And that would be to empower the elected officials of our cities, counties, and towns to enhance that nominating process, because I think that would help with empowering our cities and counties and our electeds, rather than creating another layer of elected officials and more bureaucracy. But also having them be empowered of who's nominated more so than the current method, that would enhance the continuity of experience and the vision and independence of Met Council members. It would be less staff-driven, as I've heard mentioned here today. And then also not serve at the pleasure of the governor. They would be more accountable, the Met Council members would be more accountable to the nominating elected officials that put their names forward, that have trust in them and being accountable to their particular regions. Staggered terms has sometimes been criticized as just putting a Band-Aid on a bigger problem of transparency and accountability that we seek. And I think that's a fair criticism, but looking at the history of what the legislature's discussed over time, I think it's okay to take smaller steps instead of some big revolution. Expanding the size of the council, I think, would add for responsiveness to our counties, to the cities that are affected, and even the townships. Reforming the nomination process to enhance and give more power to our elected officials, I think would be an important step to some of the values that we've talked about earlier today. And I think it would also reduce the partisanship that allowing ultimate over that, and maybe reduce it from being that agency, creature of an agency that we're a little suspicious of and elected, if we just went to a straight elected Met Council, I think that would actually increase the partisanship. And we kind of saw that with the Portland presentation that we had, not just the cost of the elections, the negativity then, and the high partisanship that went in with that, even in a city as Portland that is kind of more one-sided on the political spectrum. And so I think kind of to wrap it up is that, it's okay to make an evolution and continue to work towards a more accountable and transparent Met Council, because I don't see the political reality that we're in to have a strong across-the-board consensus for some major reform. And so while the task and the discussion and the topic is complex, I don't think we should drown ourselves in a glass of water trying to figure out how to do this. So I think focusing on the items that we have consensus on might be quite helpful to make incremental, in the next legislative session, make incremental progress in a more accountable and transparent Met Council by reforming the nominating process, staggered terms being part of that, but really empowering our local electeds who are already elected rather than creating more bureaucracy.
Thank you for your comments, and thank you, Representative Elkins. We definitely want to hear more from you, and you're always also welcome to put comments in writing as well. Is there any member from the public who's here today that would like to share any comments about anything that we've discussed today? Looking around, I don't see anyone coming forth, so we won't have public members or public members of the public today. So just to, before we adjourn, we've done a lot of hard work. We actually had an extra meeting. We met 3 Wednesdays in a row. So now you don't have to worry about coming back until Wednesday, November 29th. And so in the interim, we will finalize the last, the date and location of the last, or the first public meeting, which may end up being what it is now, but we want to have one more discussion about that. But the next 3, those are set. So just to let you know, mark your calendars for those. And the 29th, we will have a conversation with Denver, possibly other regions that have councils of governments. And so that's going to be a very important discussion on the 29th. And in the meantime, have a happy Thanksgiving, and we will reconvene in 3 weeks. And with that, this meeting of our Metropolitan Governments Task Force is adjourned.